So now let me just start the next topic, so which we call it as an array. So even like the topics which we are going to discuss now will falls under the Java. So like we are going to discuss the Java topic called as an array. So like what is meant by array? So let's take an example, like I'm providing the data type and I'm initializing the variable, and then like I'm storing some value in the variable. So I have given one generic statement called as an variable holds the value. So which means a is a variable which holds the value called as an 12. So is it possible to store multiple values in a variable? So like is it possible to store like a 12 comma 45 comma 78? So let us try that. So I'm just creating one more new class for this array. So let it be of an array example. So now the class got created. Like in order to run this program, obviously like we need a main method. So I'm just using the keyword called as an PSVM, and then I'm clicking on the enter. The main method will be created. So I'm just using the data type, and I'm trying to store a multiple values. So like 90. So if I try to do so, so it is throwing me the error. So stating that there is some error. So like identifier expected not a statement, likewise it is throwing an error. So whenever we try to store a multiple values, it is throwing an error. So is it possible in Java to store a multiple values? Yes, is it possible? So when you try to create it as an array, so whenever we use an array, with the help of an array, like we can store a multiple values. And the notation of array, so we'll start with open and close square bracket. We generally notate the array with the open and close array. So if you are trying to store a multiple values, then we should create a integer array. If you are trying to store a multiple string values, then you need to create a string array. So similar to that, like we can create a character array as well. So rather than creating the integer string and the character, so we need to use the notation called as an open and close square bracket, so which indicates array. So which means like whenever we use the array, so we can store multiple values. So we can store a multiple values, but we are having one restriction. So all the values should be like falls under the same data type. So which means we can store the multiple values of similar data types. So which means like if you are planning to create an integer array, so inside the integer array, so you should store only the integer values, which means nothing but the numerical values. So inside the string array, you can store only the string values and not the integer value. And in order to store the multiple values, so we generally use this notation called as an open and close braces. If it is of an array, all the values should be stored inside the open and the close braces. So like I can store a multiple values. So and then as usual at the end of the sentence, like we need to give the semicolon. Now I'm trying to do the same. I'm creating the integer array and I'm giving the variable name as v, and I'm storing the multiple values inside the curly braces. Okay. So now we are not getting any error. So the reason is like it is kind of an array. So whenever we use an array, with the help of an array, we can store a multiple values of similar data type. Now if I try to store a string here, so it will throw an error. So the reason is like as I told that we have a restriction. So stating that like we should store of the similar data type. In similar way, like I'm going to create a string array. Okay, let it be like h is equal to. So I can say like learn space, okay, more space, etc. So which means like we have created an array. With the help of an array, so we can store a multiple values, and the stored values will always stored in a index order. So what is mean by index order in the sense? In a programming language, so the index always starts from 0. So which means in the 0th index, the 45 is get stored. So in the first index, the 56 is get stored, and in the second index, the 78 will be get stored. So in an array, so all the values will be stored in a index order. Okay, in an index order. So for example, if you need to specifically need this 56 for your coding, or if you need this 45 for your coding, then how we are going to iterate the value from the array in the sense only with the help of the index. So the name of the array we call it as an a. So if we need the 45, then we can say so a of index. So we need to provide the index value. So when I say a of 0, so it will return me the 45. When I say a of 1, it will return me the 56. So for example, so let me just add the sysout statement. So here I'm giving a of 1. So the a of 1 here indicates like here we are having three integers, so like 0 comma 1 comma 2 comma 3. So these are the integers value which are available. So integers in the sense 0th integer indicates the 45, first integer indicates the 78, and the second integer indicates the 90 followed by the 23. So if I give it as 1 and if I right click and run this program, so I will get an output as a 78. So let it get run. It's taking some time. Yeah, so you could see the console output, we are getting the output as an 78. In similar way, like if I need to retrieve any value from this h array, I am just adding the sits out statement. I am just providing h of the integers. So if I give the h of 0, it will print the learn. Okay, so you could see it is printing the 78 as well as the learn. So whenever we are providing the index value, it should be within the range. So within the range in the sense like we are having the maximum range of up to third index. Now instead of the third index, if I try to give it as a 4 and if I try to run this program, so obviously like it will throw an error. So in a programming language, we call it as an exception. So it will throw the exception. And just note on the exception. So it is throwing the exception called as an array index out of bound exception. Okay. So this exception is thrown by the Java. So like we have discussed a few more exceptions like element not found exception, or else like the argument invalid argument exception. Is similar to that, we have an one more exception called as an array index out of bound exception. So just read the description. So it says like index 4 out of bound for the length 4. So which means like we are providing the index value beyond the range. So the maximum permitted index here is like we are having only the 3 index, and in the below case like we are having so only the index value up to 1, which means like we should provide the index value within the range. So when we try to give the provide the values beyond the range, it will always throw the array index out of bound exception. So you could see it is throwing the error in the line number 9. So whenever this array index out of bound exception populate, so as a programmer, so please check the index value which you have provided in the program. So the index value should be always within the range. Okay, so let me just give everything within the range, and if I try to run this program, so we won't get any errors. So when we try to provide the index value beyond its range, then obviously like it will throw an error. And also like we need to calculate the length of the array. So the length means like the number of value which is stored inside it. So here we have stored the 4 values, so which means so the length is like 4. So whereas in the string we have stored two values. So here the length will be like 2. And how we can calculate this length in the sense, so even we have some inbuilt method. So I'm just adding the print statement. If I say, if I need to calculate the length of this h array, I can say h dot length. Okay, so if I give the h dot length, it will print the length of the h. In similar way, like here I'm going to add the sysout statement. If I say a dot length, so it will give the length of the a. So even we can calculate the length of the array as well. Now let me just right click and run this program. So in the console, so you could be able to see the length of a array as well as the length of h array. Okay, so here you could see, so it is printing the index value. So the length of a array is like kind of an 4, and the length of h array is like kind of an 2. So we can calculate the length as well. So till this point, any doubt?